Caddis Maximus here. This time a review of non-metallic hammers. That would be plastic hammers, dead blow hammers, and rubber hammers, representing the three most common types of non-metallic hammers. They're very handy in a variety of industries, automotive, service, and certainly woodworking, to knock together various pieces of wood. You do see them quite often in woodworking, even though some people may not expect it, because you need soft-faced hammers, really soft-faced hammers, to make sure you don't damage any of your woodworking products. They're great in automotive because many automotive parts, particularly engine-related parts, are made of aluminum, so even brass hammers will damage that aluminum, so your only choice is to use plastic or rubber hammers, something that's going to be even softer than aluminum. So let's just go and make this a nice quick video. We have a couple different styles. We have a Stanley plastic hammer. These are actually acetate head hammers, the same type of plastic that screwdriver handles are commonly made out of. And acetate in this situation is pretty nice as far as a combination of hardness, durability, cost, etc. That's what they tend to use. And they're really nice because they are just a plastic face, but they're also pretty darn hard, so you get a lot of good energy delivery. They're also really lightweight, so you can really have a lot of finesse when using these. Surprisingly enough, like when I need to get a bearing pressed in and I'm just starting it out, really using like a little plastic hammer or a dead blow is great for that. We do have heavier duty versions of those acetate hammers, such as this, where they're acetate heads but attached to a metal body, so you get quite a bit more mass. And a lot of times they'll be styled like this, where they'll have one side that is partially rounded and then a second side which is totally flat. This hammer I bought used, and it's fairly well used, but you can see that the acetate really does hold up pretty well. Even when you miss and skip, it'll chip some, but it kind of wears in the same way that brass does. And a great aspect of these acetate ones is you can just take a file and spend just a moment with this viced up in a file and file yourself a nice square face again. And these heavier ones are really nice, but it's definitely handy to have a combination of them both. And we'll get to this, what appears to be a rubber mallet, but it's not, in a minute here. The next thing we have is dead blow hammers. Dead blow hammers come in a variety of weights, such as the 27 ounce. I believe this is a 16 ounce. And then we have a light little 8 ounce one. Now, how dead blow hammers work is that they usually they're actually metal cast zinc internally. And inside the head is actually a hollow cavity of, encased in zinc. And it has a bunch of beads in it. Sometimes I found that it varies. Usually they're, metal beads, but I found others which use different materials. But for the most part, they're just filled with little metal beads, and you can hear it shaking around. And the reason they do that is because the mass is separated from the body of the hammer. So when you hammer, you swing back, all the beads go to the back side, and then when you hit the surface, all the beads shift to the front, and it prevents it from wanting to bounce off. That's why they call it a dead blow, is because when you hit, it tends to want to stop. It just lands kind of like suspension on a bicycle or on a car. It goes down on a bump and it just lands. It doesn't want to bounce off, and that's the great advantage to a dead blow hammer. It isn't just a sharp strike, it's more of a hard kind of pushing force, where you're pushing it with force over a greater duration of time, rather than a hammer, which is just a very sharp impact blow. A dead blow is a combination of a hammering force and a pushing force. And of course they have various sizes, smaller ones. These are, no-name ones. Harbor Freight sells these. One thing I did want to point out is that due to the nature of dead blows, they tend to get pretty beat up. This rubberized coating, as you can see, this one hasn't been used much, but they really get torn up pretty quickly. And the face tends to tear out after a while, and it's just due to the nature of it having a metal internal body and the way how you use these. A lot of people use these in place of brass hammers and even acetate hammers, when acetate and brass hammers may be better. Fortunately, they're really not very expensive, and places like Harbor Freight just stock these regularly on the shelf, so if you do beat them up, they're pretty easy to replace. This one right here is actually a Husky, and it's pretty decent. This green-handled one is actually duplicate, and I got it because I noticed that it is a knockoff of the Husky. It looks almost the same, but there are subtle design differences where the corrugations aren't the same, the shape of the head. But I thought it was kind of funny that the Huskies was the more premium one, and they've already been knocked off. And the little bit of odd chewing was, for some reason, my cat didn't even like this green one and chewed it up pretty good. We also have 16 and 8 ounce rubber mallets or rubber hammers. And these really are a staple. Rubber hammers tend to have more durability than their dead blow counterparts. They don't get cut apart quite as easily. They give you plenty of mass, and the rubber gives you a nice combination of a soft material with resiliency as well as a reasonable amount of stiffness at the same time. Of course, the one big issue with rubber hammers is that they are rubber, so they do want to bounce off, although they're not so bad. Older ones seem to use more springy rubber. Now the rubber seems to be dampened a little better, and so they don't bounce quite as badly as they used to. I do have this one. It's an ultra steel. I think this came from O'Reilly's quite a few years ago. They use a really nice heavy-duty handle, but they did end up over-pressing it, and if you can see here, it ended up starting to split the head a little bit. So that is one aspect to look out for, is to make sure you're not getting one that does have a damaged head. Now, what I was meaning about this one over here, and this is another thing to look out for, is really cheesy one. Harbor Freight ones are rubber, but there are other discount stores. A lot of them are local. They may only have 1 or 2 branches, but they buy overstock and all sorts of cheap stuff, and basically are like a local version of a Harbor Freight. Places that might be considered retail flea markets. And you have to be careful because this is a rubber, a 8 ounce that came from one of those places. And then after I started using it a few times, I quickly realized that if this is rubber, it's not any kind of rubber I've ever seen. And it really is just a hard plastic compared to this Olympia. And you can really tell, if we take this is a piece of carbide. It's obvious, the thud, the deepened, dampened sound, we know that's rubber. But this one, much, much harder. So I actually kind of like that because it's a wide face plastic hammer, but it definitely is going to be a lot harder than rubber. And you could easily get into trouble, especially with softer, I would say woods in particular, because you get a rubber hammer and you'd be expecting just to be able to tap something in. You would end up with this one and actually start denting the wood, not realizing that it's actually a plastic hammer that's being sold as a rubber hammer. So that's one thing I did want to address. And I should also mention, always wear safety glasses when you're hammering, because obviously things can go flying. And on a final note, I do like higher quality, more premium grade versions of rubber hammers and plastic hammers and dead blows. But due to the nature of the tool and the way they just get beat up, a good one is beat up as a cheaper one, just due to the nature of how you use them. So they're more or less a consumable item. They don't, they certainly last for a while, but even rubber hammers, you use any of these over a duration of time, especially in severe working conditions, they're just going to get beat up, chipped. The molding's going to come off the dead blows. The acetate's going to end up cracking on you if you use it really hard, or it'll just get beat up to the point where there isn't enough of it left. Rubber hammers the same way. They'll get chewed up, or the heads will want to come off or split on you. And so my recommendation is find some decent ones, but buying really top shelf premium grade versions of these just makes it so you don't really want to use them where you need to, such as knocking apart transmission cases where you might get a few cuts on the face of it during the operation. Anyway, I think that's at the end of this video, and I really appreciate everybody watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.